Clarissa Explains It All was not only one of the best live-action Nickelodeon shows of the 90s, but it was one of the most influential shows of all time. While the show on the surface was about a teenage girl named Clarissa Darling living her everyday life with her friends and family, it was the way that it was presented that made it stand out. Clarissa addressing the viewers, breaking the fourth wall, talking about her interests, giving advice about how to deal with certain issues with neon-colored charts and letters, not being portrayed as the stereotypical girl who just liked boys or fashion. She did dress up in lavish clothes, sure, but her interests were from video games to music such as Pearl Jam and They Might Be Giants. She wasn't afraid to express her opinions to anyone around her, especially to her little brother Ferguson. The show lasted for 5 seasons with 65 episodes, with the last one ending on an ambiguous cliffhanger about that the story of Clarissa may not be over after her graduating from high school and moving to New York to pursue her dream of being a journalist.
How can I be homesick when I haven't even left home yet? But I guess there comes a time when you finally have to say goodbye. But maybe this isn't goodbye. Maybe this is just a new beginning. You never know.
Mitchell Kriegman, the creator of Clarissa Explains It All, wanted to continue the story of Clarissa on Nickelodeon. However, they rejected the idea because they felt that the actress who portrayed as the main lead role, Melissa Joan Hart, was too old and instead wanted to find someone younger for a brand new show. Boy, how times have changed, haven't they? With that, Mitchell went over to CBS to pitch the idea. CBS accepted it, and a pilot was created. It was simply known as Clarissa, or Clarissa Now. This wasn't the first Nickelodeon spin-off show pitched to CBS. In 1987, there were 2 versions of Double Dare hosted by Bruce Jenner that were for adults. Will second time be the charm with CBS presenting a spin-off series based off of a Nickelodeon show? How well does Clarissa Now hold up over 20 years later? Let's take a look and find out. The pilot begins with Clarissa riding on the subway, expressing herself enthusiastically as she's heading over to the Daily Post as a journalist intern with her usual narration to the viewing audience.
I just want you to know that right now is the most exciting moment of my entire life. I mean, this is the kind of thing you think in a million billion years is never going to happen to you. And even when it does, you still can't believe it. I'm on the New York City subway. If anyone had ever told me, Clarissa, darling, when you're 18, you'll be living in New York City and working at the New York Star Chronicle, I would have said, hello, are you mental? But as it turns out, I am. See, my college has this work-study program, and if you know what you really want to do, you get to do it out in the real world. Is that cool or what?
As someone who used to live in New York and traveled on the subway almost every week, this is a pretty accurate depiction, even today. She arrives at the office where she meets up with Spencer, played by Chris Colburn, whom she assumes is the city editor. He isn't. He's actually one of the reporters in training. But he shows off his personality right away of how much of a competitive jerk he is.
Hi, I'm the new intern.
Intern? Great. I like my coffee light. Lunch at noon. Here are the keys to my apartment. Cable guy's coming any day now. Wait for him. So what is she, basically a gopher, right? No actual reporting, right?
The actual city editor is Porter Russell, played by Linda Gay Hamilton. She helps Clarissa settle into her new desk, telling her that she will be assigned to being Hugh Hamilton, their main columnist assistant. While trying to introduce Hugh to Clarissa, it doesn't go very smoothly.
Hugh!
Get the hell out of here!
What was that?
You know what? Let's find you a desk.
Well, is he in there? Because I thought he was on vacation. It says here he's on vacation.
Clarissa, there's something you should know about Hugh. He's a little burnt out and angry. Tends to lash out at those around him. As far as we know, the only thing he enjoys is the abuse and humiliation he inflicts on others, especially his assistants. But who knows? Maybe you two will hit it off.
Turns out the desk she was placed in wasn't even her desk at all, but another reporter's. She expresses to herself that things aren't going the way she was hoping it would be. Not even when walking toward the utility closet to even grab a pencil, she finds it almost completely empty. Clarissa meets up with another woman as she also approaches the closet, but this time it is the main publisher, Lillian Banyan, played by Marion Seldes. She's very sweet towards Clarissa, but isn't afraid to show her intimidating side when she knocks on Hugh Hamilton's door asking him to come out.
This is not a suite at the Mauna Loa Hilton. And if you continue acting like it is, I'll take the room rate out of your pay.
After a little bit of persuasion, Hugh finally reveals himself. Hugh, played by Robert Klein, is less than thrilled when meeting up with Clarissa. With all the stress and burnout he's been going through as a columnist for over 20 years, he yells at Clarissa to go away. Spencer tells Clarissa to simply sit at her desk and wait to get fired just like all of Hamilton's other assistants. Clarissa chooses not to give up, as she decides to help Hamilton write a new story for the newspaper before its due date. Otherwise, he'll be fired. The first person that she brings in is Don Wrigley as a hot dog salesman. Nah, I'm just kidding. But he is played by the same actor, Hardy Rawls. A nice guy in real life. Kevin and I met him a few years ago on the Slime Book event. However, Hamilton already knew him, so Clarissa brings in another person, an actress named Lindy, played by Michelle Santopietro. In fact, Lindy also appeared in a previous episode of Clarissa Explains It All in the episode Brain Drain. Unfortunately, Hamilton already knows about her, so Clarissa brings in the last person. Again, Hamilton already knows about him. Clarissa feels a little bit discouraged since she's not used to being treated this mean. Hamilton simply states to her that she has to get used to it because she's in New York, and people will be treating her like this. Isn't that the truth? And this pilot came out in 1995. Imagine how much worse it is now in our cynical age when people are constantly ranting about minuscule topics on social media. Clarissa tells Hamilton about how she feels and walks away from his office. Later on, while Clarissa is distributing mail, one of the co-workers asks if she's Hamilton's assistant. She says yes while hesitating, and he gives her Hamilton's newest article. She wonders about how did Hamilton write a new article since he never left his office. Turns out when Spencer snatches the paper from Clarissa, the article is about her.
It's easy to tell Clarissa hasn't been here long. Her New York is a big salty pretzel covered in mustard. It's a red ball that falls from the sky every night because every night for Clarissa is New Year's Eve. This is sickening.
This is Clarissa's New York, and I have just one piece of advice for her. Move. New York is dead. You're not Marlo Thomas in the opening credits of That Girl. Who's Marlo Thomas?
The article creates a buzz around the Daily Post, with Lillian stating that Hamilton has his old spark back. When she approaches Hamilton, she states that he can keep his old job and that he should thank Clarissa for it. Hamilton brings Clarissa to her office, discussing about slightly changing the article so she would feel less embarrassed. Clarissa doesn't mind, as she still wants to help him out being his assistant writing stories for the newspaper. He considers it, and Clarissa walks away from his office feeling good about her position. She even gets a computer, which makes Spencer incredibly jealous. Clarissa gives it to him anyway, but not without laying a snappy remark.
I suppose I should say thank you. It's just that I put in for the computer 2 months ago. I am a reporter, and you're an intern, and it's your first day, okay? Thank you.
Really? It's nothing. Just remember, every time you look at it, you owe me.
The episode concludes with her pretending to be an old-fashioned news reporter, typing on an old-fashioned typewriter with her accidentally pulling too hard and breaking it. Here's something that might interest you. The person who co-wrote and teleplayed this pilot was none other than Terry Minsky, the same woman who would later create Lizzie McGuire. When you compare Clarissa and Lizzie back to back, it's more or less the same concept. A teenage girl living her everyday life with small segments that break the fourth wall, an annoying little brother who comes up with clever schemes, goofy yet loving parents who don't have a clue about how to raise their kids, a boy who happens to be a friend but not a boyfriend, who helps her with advice, sticking by her side when she needs help. It's funny because when I first saw Lizzie McGuire, I always thought of it as a 2000s version of Clarissa Explains It All. And now I know why. What do you know? In my opinion, Clarissa Now feels almost nothing like its predecessor, and not in a good way. A lot of the upbeat charm and colorful presentation is gone, replaced by a somber tone and bland setting. With the exception of the subway, the Daily Post is the only location that we see throughout the entire pilot. We don't even get to see Clarissa traveling around New York City to meet up with the people that she brought in earlier to Hamilton's office. That's a huge opportunity lost, since that would have broadened out not only the setting, but it would have given us a bigger view of Clarissa being determined of trying to impress Hamilton being the best assistant he's ever had. Not to mention that none of the additional characters are developed enough. Yes, I know it's a pilot, so it's understandable that they had to squeeze in the whole premise in about 21 minutes, but a little more time spent on them would have benefited by a good margin. But the biggest gripe for me is that Clarissa is the only person from the original series that we see on this pilot. There's no mention of her parents, Ferguson, or even Sam. There's not even a quick cameo from them. People who are fans of the original show would feel jarred due to the sudden change. And to the people who've never seen Clarissa Explains it all, they would just see it as a typical CBS sitcom. It's the exact same way as I feel about Disney's Doug, with its sudden change from its first episode after its original run from Nickelodeon. But I'll discuss about that another time. Another interesting fact about Clarissa Now was that this was never meant to be televised. It was only supposed to be shown if it would have ever been greenlit for a TV show. But it was shown on CBS once, as well as Nickelodeon's Big Help-a-thon in '95, a year after Clarissa Explains It All ended its run. Regardless, the spin-off series didn't get a large reaction from viewers, and the spin-off series was scrapped. There were also some behind-the-scenes issues that occurred during the making of the pilot. The CBS executives were meddling Kriegman's script, and the final product wasn't what Mitchell envisioned originally. There was also another person who wasn't too fond about how Clarissa Now ended up being, and that was Melissa Joan Hart herself, according to a 2015 interview with Huffington Post Live.
So we shot one episode, a pilot, with some really talented, fun people, some Broadway stars, and oh my gosh, what's his name? Anyway, some people that the older crowd knows, and it just didn't really have the feel of Clarissa, so it didn't really take off. The network decided not to make this show, not to go forward with it, and when people found out about it recently, they've been pretty upset that it didn't go forward. But it wouldn't have been the same show. I don't think people would have liked it as much.
But as a concept, it was a great idea. The fact that Clarissa Explains It All did lead up to that ambiguous ending, and then would have continued later on with Clarissa going to college and working in New York, would have been amazing to see. It's just too bad that it never came into fruition. It was just an idea that was at the wrong place at the wrong time. It wouldn't take until another 20 years later until Mitchell Kriegman would try this concept again.